Welcome back to the vlog. Vlog 18, believe it or not. Welcome back to social studies. All right, so the last vlog we left on, you guys were Lewis and Clark and you were exploring the new territories that Thomas Jefferson had just bought. We're going to skip ahead a little bit in time, but not that much actually. And let me read this to you here. It says, by early 1816, nearly 64,000 people lived in Indiana, and many eagerly anticipated statehood. In December 1815, a lawyer and politician from Indiana named Jonathan Jennings requested that Congress let Indiana become a state. And by May 1816, Congress had agreed to begin the process. So the process of Indiana becoming a state. I don't know if you remember this back a little while ago. When they were first making the Constitution, they said that to become a state, you needed 60,000 people. And 60,000 people sounds like a lot, but if you think about in Bloomington alone, when there's students here, there's over 80,000 people. So just Bloomington has 80,000 people now. Indianapolis has millions. So we've really grown since then. But back then, the entire state of Indiana had only the amount of people that live in Bloomington all across the state. Before Indiana could become a state, though, it needed to have a constitution. So in 1816 of June, this is after the federal government said you could become a state. In 1816, 43 delegates met in Corydon. I think it's Corydon. And they were led by Jonathan Jennings. And they wrote a new constitution in 18 days. They discussed such things as slavery, and they said it would not be allowed in Indiana, and many other topics were covered by them. Slavery was the biggest one, especially back then. And the Constitution went into effect on June 29th, 1816. Fast forward a few months again, on December 11th, 1816, the federal government of the United States allowed Indiana to become a state. Woo! It was the 19th state, and it elected its first officials, and Jennings became the state's first governor. So pretty cool about how Indiana became a state, and just how few people there were back then. So after Indiana became a state, Indiana started to grow by quite a bit. They grew, a lot of people came from different parts of the country. A lot were immigrants, and immigrants are people who move from one country to another. So a lot of them came from Europe was where a lot of the first immigrants came from. They also came from other states such as Kentucky and Ohio, looking for more opportunities or more land or a place to start a business and a family. So as they grow, we needed a way to get around. So we started to improve our transportation. So if you're thinking back to when Lewis and Clark first started, there were no roads. Lewis and Clark, a lot of you guys decided which ways you were going to travel. I loved them all. Lewis and Clark actually decided they were going to travel by rivers and canoes because it was easier to travel. They didn't have to cut down trees if they brought wagons and stuff like that. So they would follow rivers a lot of times and to try to get to the other coast. When Indiana became a state, they started building things like roads and also, same with water, canals. So a canal is just like a man-made river that boats can go up and down, and you can transport a lot of big goods and like a lot of grain or cattle fast and quick. They also started making roads, and they had, I don't think they called it a highway back then, but they called it federal roads, and they started to connect to other states because states could trade with each other then. Again, trade is always really important when a state or a country is growing. So if you could get to somewhere easier, you could trade more items and quicker. So transportation really starts to take off, especially the roads. And it could be just like a little cut down path that the wagons could get down to, all the way to like what we would call like a dirt road. But that was a really good road back then. So they made it possible to travel to Chicago, to St. Louis. You can go to a couple places in Ohio, even all the way up to Detroit. The roads started to really come in, and their big impact was improved trade. And it also, roads, if you think about it, roads go out, but roads come in again. Indiana grows and grows and grows. As Indiana was growing, it led to kind of a new conflict. Again, this is with Native Americans again. The Native Americans, as more and more white settlers came in, they lost their lands, and there was just more and more conflict. And so to help this, the United States passed this. It wasn't a very good thing. They passed this Indian Removal Act of 1830. And it gave President Andrew Jackson the authority to force, not by choice, but to force Native Americans to move to reservations way west. So like Oklahoma or Nebraska or Iowa or even up to Minnesota, like it forced them to move away from the lands that they've been living for generations. And it forced them to leave, and then white settlers could take their land. So they went to a reservation, and it's an area of land that the United States set aside for the Native Americans. It usually wasn't a good piece of land. Like, it wasn't next to rivers for water or food. It wasn't next to lakes. It was usually like a big dry piece of land that wasn't even great for farming. And so after this act, in 1830, soldiers marched 800 Potawatomis from their homes in northern Indiana to new lands in Kansas. That was another spot. And it became known as the Trail of Death because they weren't kind when they did. They didn't give them wagons. They didn't give them horses. They literally had to walk the hundreds of miles from Indiana to Kansas. And out of the 800 that started, only 250 lived. So like way less than half didn't even make it. And this was kind of like as Indiana was growing up. So like even though we were starting to do really good things like having more and more trade and stuff like that, there's always a downside to getting bigger. And that was the Native Americans kind of got cut out. As more and more people came in, they tried to make a utopia. And this is a part of the reason that they removed Native Americans. A utopia is an imagined place where everything is perfect. And that usually meant that it was going to be like all just white people and the cities were going to be clean and designed perfectly. But realistically, the utopias never worked out because that's just not how life is. So they tried to do utopias, but quarrels broke out and everyone had a different idea, and utopias kind of went away. And the leader moved back to Britain, actually. So, kind of the early history of Indiana, really cool how we became a state. I'm going to give you guys a few questions for this, so you're going to look for like a little quiz. It's just a practice quiz to see what you guys learned. I'm going to read the questions right now for you. What different groups traveled to Indiana? So again, I talked about who might have traveled and where they came from. Or why did different groups travel from Indiana? What had to happen for Indiana to become a state? Maybe how many people you needed? Why were Native Americans forced to move west? Why did they have to move? And how did Indiana roads help the population grow? Those will be the questions. And I look forward to seeing what you guys have to hear. And I will see you in the next vlog.